I just don't get it. I don't get why the UFC would screw him. There's no motivation, reason enough, or big enough that I think is even remotely worth it. Based on what we've been reading and what's been said in the media, it looks like Aljamain Sterling, Aljo, might not get the title shot he deserves. I understand the UFC sometimes makes fights where the title shot is given to someone who's not the #1 contender for an injury, name value, stylistically. There's lots of reasons that they might shift it. But right now, Aljamain Sterling is pretty clearly the #1 fighter in the division outside of Petr Yan to me. And I don't see a reason why he shouldn't almost immediately be given the offer for a title fight. It doesn't sit well with me considering his resume and everything we've seen from him recently. So UFC President Dana White, at a scrum a while ago, was asked by MMA Fighting and other media about who's next for Petr Yan. To say he doesn't know, Dana White said he doesn't know, that's so odd to me. Why is it not clear? It's one of the more troubling times in the UFC in terms of matchmaking when I don't understand why not just make this fight. The motivation isn't there to protect Petr Yan. He's not a massive draw. He doesn't have some giant fan base. There's no reason why Aljamain doesn't make sense right now, to me. I'm going to break that down. I'm going to go over some of the other guys in the division. I'm going to make the case of why this doesn't make any sense. I wanted to note that Aljamain responded publicly to Dana White about this topic. Aljamain Sterling has been campaigning and calling for this fight since his win over Cory Sandhagen, that wonderful submission win. To quote Aljamain, he said, "I earned my shot, and it's time for me to realize a dream. Cut the games." And here's something he said that I don't necessarily agree with, but I agree that Aljamain has at least the same level of resume as Petr Yan, and I personally would argue it's better. But he said recently on Twitter, 1000% Sandhagen has a better resume than Yan, meaning Petr Yan, the current champion who beat Jose Aldo. He follows it up by saying, "I finished that fight early," referring to his finish over Cory. What else do I need to do? It's seriously starting to feel like I'm the most hated guy in the UFC. Now, I don't think he's the most hated, but I don't feel like the UFC respects Sterling. I don't think so at all. I don't know if they don't take the division seriously. I don't know what the issue is. Sterling is a super charismatic guy with lots of fun finishes. He's got his fair share of some rough, drab fights, but those were a while ago. Those are before his last loss. I don't see the negativity there. But let's go over Aljo. Let's go over the resumes. Let's make our case. So Marlon Moraes has the biggest case outside of Aljo.
Curious to get your thoughts on Magic Marlon Moraes. He was initially scheduled to fight Petr Yan. Obviously, the pandemic happened. Where does he fit in this bantamweight equation?
He fits. Obviously, he's the #1 guy. So, yeah, we'll get all that figured out when we get home.
Outside of Sterling, there's no one that really has a case. Marlon Moraes is the last person to beat Sterling, and he did it in dominant fashion back in December of 2007 with that knee KO. It was crazy. But Moraes got a title shot after that. He lost very dominantly to the champion before Yan, Henry Cejudo, who retired. So I don't really understand why he would be getting it, considering that he did beat Jose Aldo, who got a title shot against Yan in the vacant belt, even though he lost and Moraes beat him. And it's now you can kind of see why the UFC is doing this, because none of this makes any sense. We'll get into why maybe they did that and why it doesn't apply here as much. Like, I can make the case for Aldo kind of with Yan. I can kind of make that. But I can see how the reasons you might have used to justify that then don't work here with Aljamain and Yan. It just doesn't play. But Moraes doesn't have that big of a case. Outside of his win over Sterling and his split decision win over Aldo, I'm not terribly interested in that. It would be a fun fight. I think it'd be a super interesting fight. Both these guys are pretty young. They're going to match up anyways. I don't know why you would skip him over because you think it's a slightly more interesting fight. I don't. I actually think Aljamain is a more interesting fight because I think Jan's biggest weakness is his grappling. If you're just looking for a stand-up war, maybe. If you just want bang. The next in line would be Cody Garbrandt, who was on a 3-fight skid until just recently knocking out Rafael Assunção. Fantastic win. In the current context, I don't think that makes any sense. And Cody's not even campaigning for it. He's actively campaigning for a fight at flyweight. Yeah, he's actively campaigning for a title fight at the weight class below this. So I know I'm going to get some flack for this. But I think Aljo's current resume is at least equal to Petr Yan's or better. And I'm going to argue it's probably better here. And we're going to go through this and explain why. Aljo's last loss was in 2017, as I mentioned, to Marlon Moraes. And it was a brutal KO loss. Fantastic win for Moraes. But it's been over 2 years, and he's clearly learned from that. He's had 5 fights, 5 wins, where he's looked pretty dominant in all of them, with several finishes in that 5. Some crazy ones too, but specifically the most recent one over Cory Sandhagen. He followed the loss from Moraes with a strong win over Brett Johns, a European standout. Then he had an insane submission win over Cody Stanman, one of the strongest wrestlers in the division. Then he had another strong decision over Jimmy Rivera, and then he got another win over Pedro Munoz, and then the most recent win over Cory Sandhagen, that submission win over him in about a minute and a half. I think it was a minute and 28 seconds. In Aljamain's last 6 fights, he has 1 loss and 5 wins. 5 of those 6 fights are against guys in the top 10 currently, okay? One of them is Marlon Moraes. So if you subtract him, 4 of his last 6 fights are against top 10 opponents, and he's won them dominantly. That's good. That is one of the strongest cases you could have for a title fight. That is, you put that in any division around lightweight, featherweight, heavyweight, you put that anywhere, and that person's getting a title shot. Let's look at Yan's last 6 fights, and they're good. Had a win over Korean Jin Soo-san, solid decision win. Petr Yan got a great finish over Douglas Silva de Andrade, a unanimous decision over Jimmy Rivera. A lot of people have, Jimmy Rivera's fought everyone at this point. It's crazy. He's the man that goes through everybody. A KO over of Faber, Uriah Faber, and most recently, his win for the vacant title against Jose Aldo with the late finish. These records look relatively similar. I'm impressed immensely by Petr Yan, but I don't think it's hard to argue that Sterling has a better resume here. I think this resume, if you look over the last 2 or so years, Aljamain Sterling had more of a case for the title shot than Yan did. He definitely had a better case than Aldo outside of Aldo's legacy. I get it. He had to have gotten that out of legacy. He literally had just lost to Moraes. But Yan didn't get it off of legacy. And he's not a massive draw. He's exciting. He's interesting. We can look at Marlon Moraes. He's ranked 3rd currently, and he has his win over Aljamain. He has the win over Aldo, the split decision, but then he lost to Cejudo before that, and then he's got wins over Rafael Sunsao and Jimmy Rivera in impressive fashions. Good resume, great. I think due to his very recent loss to Cejudo, I think that puts him a step behind. Let's say they think the fight has a 10% chance of being more fun because Moraes is going to really push the stand-up because that's his game. I don't think that outweighs the current rankings or the resume of Sterling. It doesn't, I'm not them, but that doesn't make any sense to me. Then we have Cory Sandhagen is the next guy, who Aljamain literally just submitted. You're seeing my point, I think, now. This doesn't make a lot of sense. Personally, I hope the UFC does the right thing and gives Aljamain his title shot. It doesn't help the UFC to play games with him right now. I don't know why. It looks pretty clear like he's going to be around in the division for a while. He's young still. His style's built for like a long-lasting fighter. Like, I don't know. I just don't see the motivation for screwing them. This division's never been massively drawing. It's not like they have a GSP or someone who's massively selling pay-per-views they need to watch out for and protect in any fashion. I just don't get it. This is one of those mysteries of what's even the reasoning behind it. Where's the motivation? I don't see the dollar signs pointing anywhere. I don't see the negative relationship. I don't see the massive positive one with other fighters that would somehow give them the shot. I don't know. I just don't get it. I don't get why the UFC would screw him. There's no motivation or reason enough or big enough that I think is even remotely worth it. Personally, I think Aljamain submits Petr Yan. I'm crazy, people think. People think I'm crazy for this. I honestly think Aljamain Sterling submits Petr Yan. I think his grappling is a lot higher level. Now, the wrestling, it's close. Petr Yan can shut him down and it becomes a striking affair, and I think that Petr Yan overall has a better striking game, specifically boxing. But if this gets to the ground, I am very confident in Aljamain's jiu-jitsu. His positional grappling, his ability to use wrestling to get to the dominant positions he wants is very high level. He's in a very high level gym. He's a Serra Longo guy, and Serra has great jiu-jitsu, especially for MMA. I mean, just based on the last couple wins and what he's been doing on the ground, I'm confident in him. I'm a little biased. I'm a fan of him, but the facts are facts, and he's got a great chance at winning, and he definitely deserves a title shot. So what do you think? Should the UFC keep screwing Aljamain Sterling?